Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. All Michael wanted was silence, the kind you find only in the deep desert. But when a rogue HOA president declares war on his NASA-linked satellite dish, a quiet life spirals into federal investigations, courtroom drama, and a battle for freedom against suburban tyranny. I bought my land for one reason: silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the kind of deep, wide silence you only get in the high desert, where the wind hums through the juniper and the stars don't compete with neighbors' porch lights. 3 acres just outside Sedona, Arizona. No HOA. No meetings about mailbox colors. No smiling psychos with clipboards. Just the raw edge of nature on one side and the occasional yuppie subdivision on the other. I'd been here 7 years, and for the most part, it had been bliss. I built my own place, planted mesquite, ran fiber lines underground, and most importantly, I installed the dish. Now let's clear something up. This wasn't your average DirecTV contraption. The unit in my backyard was a high-gain, narrowband satellite dish with real-time telemetry uplink, used under a civilian contract for NASA. I'm a communications engineer, subcontracted for data relay support. It sounds fancy, but mostly it means I sit in my office and watch numbers stream in from satellites monitoring everything from atmospheric ionization to orbital debris fields. A bit dull unless you're the kind of guy who finds beauty in clean signals. I do. That dish had federal clearance, full FCC and NASA licensing, with a laminated copy of the authorization hanging right beside my back door. So imagine my reaction when I found a handwritten note taped to my front gate in cheap glitter pen. Remove the satellite tower immediately. It is illegal and hazardous to the neighborhood. No name, just that. Signed with a red lipstick smear like some twisted HOA Valentine. I crumpled it up and figured it was a prank. Maybe some bored teen from Desert Pines, the HOA down the road, had wandered too far from their regulation-sized lawn and got spooked by weird science equipment. I didn't think more of it until the second note came. This one was more aggressive. Printed in all caps on a HOA Desert Pines letterhead, though obviously not official. Still glitter pen. Still the same bizarre tone. Remove the illegal radio equipment. Final warning. This is a neighborhood, not a military base. This time I responded, typed and laminated, because I like to set the tone. To whom it may concern, this property is not under the jurisdiction of HOA Desert Pines or any other homeowners association. The satellite dish is legally permitted under federal license FCC X34219B in use for active civilian support of telemetry systems operated by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Tampering, trespassing, or obstruction of this system is a violation of both state and federal law. Respectfully, Michael Brenner III zip-tied the notice to the dish's support beam just below the tracking actuator. I figured that would shut them up. But you don't reason with a Karen, especially not one who's just been appointed president of a neighborhood cult disguised as a community board. 2 days later, I spotted her. Blonde bob, tight athletic jacket with HOA logo embroidery, a notebook in one hand and a phone in the other. She was parked just outside my gate, leaning over the hood of a white Lexus SUV, staring through binoculars like she was bird-watching my life. I stepped out and gave her a wave. Not friendly, not hostile, just enough to let her know I saw her. She snapped a photo and drove off without a word. Then came the flyers. Dozens of them taped to mailboxes up and down the gravel stretch near my property, even though only 2 other houses exist within walking distance. They all had the same line: "Is your neighbor illegally broadcasting radiation?" It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathological. I was in the middle of filing a quiet complaint to the sheriff's department. Nothing formal, just a keep an eye on this nutjob email, when I noticed something even weirder. My cameras had been triggered twice in the last 24 hours near the side trail that leads toward the back of my property, not near the house, just along the barbed wire line that separates my land from BLM territory. It wasn't wildlife. No antlers or glowing eyes, no coyotes sniffing at the fence. Just a slow, cautious human figure circling the perimeter. I boosted the infrared range on the motion cameras and added a verbal warning to the system. You are trespassing on federally registered private property. You are being recorded. The warning system went off at 2:40 in the morning that night. I didn't see anyone when I checked the monitor, just a shadow vanishing behind a yucca tree. I didn't sleep much after that. I left the house around 10 that morning, I had a meeting in town with a contractor about reinforcing the rear foundation wall of my workshop, some minor erosion from a flash flood last spring that I'd been putting off fixing. I was gone maybe 5 hours, 6 tops. Nothing felt out of place when I pulled back into the gravel drive. No broken gate, no tire marks, just the quiet hum of desert wind and the shimmer of heat dancing above the canyon line. Then I rounded the corner and saw it. The dish was gone. Not shifted, not damaged, gone. The tracking mount had been ripped clean off its foundation block, sheared bolts still embedded in the concrete. The coaxial cables had been cut, not unscrewed, clean snips through heavy shielding and all. Amplifiers and directional housing lay scattered across the gravel like roadkill. One of the waveguides had been tossed into the scrub. The rest of the array was just missing. I stood there, frozen for maybe 10 seconds. Not because I didn't understand what I was looking at, but because my mind refused to process the level of stupidity required to do this. The damn thing looked like it had been hit by a gang of drunk survivalists with wire cutters. I didn't bother touching anything. I backed away, pulled out my phone, and called the sheriff. Then I dialed my contact at NASA's Civilian Operations Division. By the time I hung up, I had 3 case numbers, a federal liaison on the way, and a headache so sharp it felt like someone had driven a U-bolt through my skull. Deputy Ramirez arrived first. Middle-aged, sunburned, with that tired, I've seen it all look that only small-town cops and ER nurses seem to have. He walked the site with me in silence, occasionally nodding as I pointed out the missing components. "Anyone you suspect?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Karen Mills, Desert Pines, HOA." He wrote it down like it wasn't the most predictable name I could have given. "Any video?" I walked him inside and pulled up the camera feed. The side trail. Timestamp, 11:22 a.m. 3 figures, 1 woman, 2 men, approached the rear of my lot on foot. No vehicle in view. They cross the barbed wire. The woman is in front, clipboard in hand. The men carry what look like bolt cutters and a toolbox. They disappear behind the shed. 12 minutes later, they emerge carrying pieces of my dish. The amplifier, the tilt motor, even the primary receiver. One of the guys stumbles and drops it. They laugh. Laugh. Then they vanish back into the chaparral, ducking through the brush like smug little gorillas of suburban order. The woman, clearly visible, is Karen. Ramirez leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "That's her?" "Sure is. That's the radiation hazard she's been threatening to take care of." "Jesus," he muttered. "You know what this is?" "Oh, I know exactly what this is. That was active telemetry equipment tied into a live NASA relay. They didn't just destroy a piece of property. They interfered with federal communications infrastructure." He let out a slow whistle and stepped outside to call in a report. I watched from the window as he radioed back to dispatch, his face going tighter by the minute. By the time he re-entered the house, I'd already printed copies of the federal authorization, the contractor credentials, the incident log, and a detailed inventory of the damage. NASA's legal department had also forwarded a digital letter of record stating the impact, a 47-minute data outage for orbital debris monitoring, logged and traceable. Deputy Ramirez didn't say much. He took the paperwork, shook my hand, and said, "You'll be hearing from the federal side soon. This isn't local anymore." 2 hours later, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Government plates. Out stepped 2 individuals in plain clothes, a woman in a blazer and sunglasses, and a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere but Arizona. They introduced themselves, federal field counsel and technical advisor, respectively. I showed them the site, the cables, the broken actuator. The woman took photos, the man took measurements. They asked for full video backups, which I uploaded to an encrypted drive and handed over. "We'll initiate a federal complaint," the woman said coolly. "Property damage, unauthorized interference, probable violation of Title 18, Section 1361. "Felony?" I asked. "Federal felony," she confirmed. They left with the evidence. I stood in the dust, staring at the bent mounting bolts like I was reading tea leaves. That evening, while trying to unwind with a beer and whatever trash TV I could stomach, I got another visit. This time, not a car pulling in, but the sudden ping of a motion alert. Back fence. 20 yards from the site of the wrecked dish. I checked the camera. Karen. She was alone, standing just outside the fence line, hands on her hips, looking at the mess like a satisfied homeowner inspecting her gardening work. She stayed for maybe a minute, then turned and walked off without a word. The next morning, I woke up to a calendar full of calls. NASA wanted a full damage report, including equipment specs and replacement estimates. Their team had already filed a formal notification with the Office of the Inspector General, and I was informed that a federal investigator would likely be assigned within the week. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office sent me a request for a sworn affidavit and a list of any prior altercations with Karen Mills or the HOA. I didn't have to dig far, just forwarded the original letters, photos of the flyers, and timestamps from the surveillance videos. It was shaping up to be a fun week. By noon, the story had already begun to leak. Someone in the sheriff's office, probably without malice, had mentioned the phrase federal satellite equipment to a local reporter. That's all it took. A headline popped up in the Sedona Gazette Online edition, "Private Citizen Satellite for NASA Sabotaged by HOA President." A day later, it had been reposted on 3 Arizona news blogs, 2 Reddit threads, and a Facebook HOA watchdog group. Comments ranged from amused disbelief to full-on conspiracy theories about alien surveillance and 5G poisoning. I ignored most of it. Karen, however, did not. She responded in the only way someone like her could, doubling down. That afternoon, I received a hand-delivered letter slid into my mailbox in a bright yellow envelope labeled urgent in red marker. It was a copy of a complaint Karen had filed with the Sedona Building and Safety Department, accusing me of erecting an unpermitted communication structure that posed serious public health risks, including potential electromagnetic system contamination. She was accusing me of beaming poison at the neighbors. According to the complaint, I had constructed a high-powered satellite uplink disguised as a backyard installation without approval from Desert Pines HOA and without regard for radiation safety compliance or visual standards. I nearly laughed. When I got to the part where she claimed the dish emitted intense microwave bursts capable of sterilizing local wildlife, I wasn't sure whether to call a lawyer or an exorcist. The next day, an actual building inspector showed up. His name was Arlo Jenkins, skinny guy in his 50s with a straw hat and a clipboard full of forms. He looked vaguely embarrassed when he introduced himself. "Sorry about this, Mr. Brenner. We get a couple of these complaints a month, usually someone fighting with their neighbor over a fence. But this one, well, this one's a bit different. Because it's about a satellite dish for NASA?" He nodded. "Yeah, that's new." I walked him around back, showed him the ruined mount, the bare patch of dirt where the dish used to be, and the remains of the amplifier casing I'd retrieved from the scrub. He jotted everything down, asked a few procedural questions, and then I showed him the laminated federal permits, NASA's letter of authorization, and a copy of the data contract. "Well, this is way out of our league," he admitted. "We don't enforce federal infrastructure rules. Hell, I didn't even know private citizens could work with NASA." "Welcome to the future." "I'm going to close this one out as invalid," he said, sighing as he tucked his pen behind his ear. "But I'd expect more noise from her. People like that don't back down just because they're wrong." "I'm counting on it." He gave me a half smile and left. I filed the whole incident under noise and turned my attention back to restoring functionality. The NASA team had authorized a temporary dish while the main unit was replaced, and they were overnighting a new assembly from Pasadena. In the meantime, I set up perimeter alarms and reinforced the gate with a lock bar, just in case. 2 days later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, obviously, but one of the residents who lived near the edge of Desert Pines, a quiet guy named Phil who walked his dog past my place every evening, sent me a summary via email. Karen had used the meeting to double down on the claim that I was endangering the community. She'd called me a rogue contractor operating military-grade equipment and claimed that radiation complaints had been filed with the city. They hadn't. She even presented a printout from a fake satellite danger blog showing a thermal image of a different antenna, claiming it came from my property. Then she unveiled the real kicker. She claimed she was planning legal action against me for negligent endangerment and psychological harm to residents. At this point, I realized Karen wasn't just reckless. She was escalating into delusion. But the part that really got me, she was trying to spin her destruction of my dish as an emergency community intervention. According to her, I had failed to respond to multiple safety concerns and left the HOA no choice but to act in the interest of public health. It was an admission. She'd essentially confessed to orchestrating the whole break-in and destruction of property, on record in front of 30 witnesses, all of whom were now named on a summary email sent to every HOA member. She thought she was defending herself. In reality, she just handed me a golden ticket. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in my living room with 2 government-issued laptops open, 3 external drives running diagnostics, and a NASA compliance officer on speakerphone walking me through the documentation for the formal damages claim. I'd spent the better part of the day compiling time-stamped video files, before and after photos, and a full inventory of the destroyed equipment, right down to the serial numbers on the fried waveguides. I wasn't just rebuilding a system. I was helping prepare a federal case. At around 2:30 in the afternoon, a white sedan with no plates pulled up across the road from my gate. I watched from the window as Karen stepped out, wearing sunglasses like she thought that made her invisible. She was followed by a man in a rumpled suit carrying a briefcase, and a woman I recognized as one of the HOA board members. Becky something, the one who'd once tried to ticket my mailbox for being unapproved modernist wood. They didn't open the gate. They just stood there, staring in the direction of the back of my property, where the new temporary dish was already half assembled. I'd spent the morning with a technician installing the reinforced pivot mount, and we hadn't even cleaned up yet. Karen pointed, said something sharp, and the man in the suit nodded and opened his briefcase. They were taking photos, measurements, notes. I went outside. "Can I help you?" Karen turned, smiling in that way only people with delusions of superiority can. "We're here conducting a visual inspection on behalf of Desert Pines HOA," she said, as if reading from a prepared script. "We're documenting ongoing code violations and preparing a nuisance claim for the city." I leaned on the gate, arms crossed. "You do realize, again, that this is private land not under your HOA, right?" The man in the suit spoke. "We have reason to believe your property lies within disputed boundary lines, Mr. Brenner." I raised an eyebrow. "You planning to dispute that in court? Or just out here on the shoulder?" Karen interrupted. "We're also filing an environmental safety petition with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. Your equipment poses potential electromagnetic hazards, and several residents have complained of headaches, fatigue, and even rashes after walking past your fence. Maybe they're allergic to common sense. Mockery won't help you, Mr. Brenner," she said coldly. "We've consulted with experts." "Experts in what? Voodoo?" She tried to recover, but Becky was already pulling out her phone and recording video. "I suggest you leave," I said. "You're trespassing. And while I'd love to see you explain to a federal judge why you're harassing someone involved in a NASA contract, I'd prefer to finish rebuilding the system you so graciously destroyed." Karen's face twitched. She wasn't used to being called out with precision. "We were protecting the community," she said flatly. "You left us no choice." There it was again. That line. I walked away without another word, went straight to my desk, and fired off a new email to the NASA legal team and the federal liaison, attaching a screenshot of Karen and her entourage from the perimeter camera. Less than 2 hours later, I got a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They'd reviewed the footage. The federal prosecutor had now officially upgraded the case from vandalism and interference to interference with federal operations, conspiracy, and destruction of government-assigned equipment. Later that evening, I got a second email from the prosecutor's office. Attached was a copy of the drafted criminal complaint naming Karen Mills as the primary defendant, with 2 co-conspirators. The complaint cited violations under 18 U.S. Code Paragraph 1361, Government Property Destruction, 18 U.S. Code Paragraph 371, Conspiracy to Commit Offense Against the United States, 18 U.S. Is Code Paragraph 1038. False information and hoaxes due to the radiation claims. The email concluded with a note that the Department of Justice had also informed the Sedona Police Department and the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office to coordinate potential arrest proceedings once detainment is authorized. I poured a glass of bourbon and toasted my surveillance system. The next morning, I received a voicemail from a local reporter. "Hi, Mr. Brenner. This is Callie Hart from Channel 4 Action News in Flagstaff. I wanted to reach out about a developing story involving HOA enforcement and potential interference with government operations. We'd love to get your side of things if you're open to a short interview." I didn't respond. Not yet. The story was already gaining traction without me having to say a word. Later that same day, 2 detectives from the Sedona PD showed up at Karen's house. They were there for about 20 minutes. I didn't need to guess what it was about. My contact in the sheriff's office confirmed it was a pre-arrest notification. Karen would be formally charged within 72 hours, pending federal confirmation. Apparently, her legal counsel was already trying to negotiate some kind of immunity. She'd gone from HOA Queen Bee to desperate liability in less than a week. I checked the perimeter camera feed again that night, just out of habit. Karen's SUV didn't move once, but a new sign had appeared on her fence. It read, "We are being targeted for defending our community. Pray for us." I considered printing out a reply. NASA says hi, but I figured she'd get the message soon enough. By the time the arrest warrant was formally issued, the temperature in Sedona had climbed past 100 degrees. The desert was blistering, but my inbox was hotter. NASA's internal legal team had moved fast. They'd formally filed a claim for damages, citing mission disruption, system outage, and unauthorized tampering with classified communications infrastructure. The exact figure wasn't made public, but I'd seen enough of the correspondence to know it wasn't petty change, high six figures at least. And that was before my own civil suit kicked in. Around mid-morning, a convoy of 3 law enforcement vehicles rolled up to Desert Pines. No sirens, no fanfare, just the quiet, efficient precision of a federal operation. I watched from a respectful distance, binoculars trained from my porch, as 2 agents approached Karen's home. Her white SUV was in the driveway. Her fake radiation warning signs were still up. One of the officers knocked, the other flanked the side. It took 5 minutes, maybe less. She came out in a loose blouse, hair pinned back, holding what looked like a folder of paperwork. Her face was stiff, pale. They didn't cuff her, not in front of her neighbors, but they didn't ask nicely either. She got into the car without looking back. The other 2 board members weren't home. They were picked up later that afternoon. And just like that, the Queen was gone. Word spread through Desert Pines like wildfire. Within hours, their HOA message board, yes, I had access, thank you Phil and his dog walking route, lit up with panic, accusations, and declarations of innocence. Several residents began publicly distancing themselves from Karen's actions. One person even wrote, "I thought the dish was just for streaming. I didn't know it was space-level serious." That night, HOA board member Becky resigned in a 2-sentence email. The subject line read, "I didn't sign up for prison." Meanwhile, my temporary dish was fully operational, and the replacement array was on its way from Langley. NASA was pushing through the rebuild on a priority recovery protocol, which essentially meant they were footing the bill, and I was overseeing it. Engineers would arrive within the week. I cleared space in the back for staging equipment and ordered a secondary security system with layered infrared motion detection, license plate capture, and facial recognition. I wasn't taking chances, but Karen hadn't given up yet. While she waited for arraignment, her attorney filed a countersuit against me. Yes, me. The man whose property she trespassed on, whose equipment she destroyed, and whose federal contract she compromised. The grounds? Intentional infliction of emotional distress and community harassment. I almost choked on my coffee when I read the filing. She claimed that my surveillance setup constituted constant psychological violation, that the radiation gave her chronic migraines, and that the community had suffered irreparable spiritual harm from invasive federal equipment. NASA's legal counsel responded with 2 words, "Let them try." In parallel, my own attorney, James Rothman, had filed the first of several civil actions against Karen personally and against HOA Desert Pines as a liable entity. We were seeking damages for physical destruction of equipment, loss of income from contract disruption, emotional and reputational damage, trespassing, legal and surveillance costs, and, just to put the cherry on top, malicious defamation. We then weren't playing for headlines. We were playing for precedent. At a preliminary court session, Rothman stood calmly as the defense tried to argue that the dish had been an architectural blight and that Karen acted in good faith on behalf of concerned citizens. The judge didn't even blink. Good faith doesn't allow you to cut live federal telemetry systems with bolt cutters, he said. Motion to dismiss counterclaim is granted with prejudice. That shut her lawyer up. Then came the big one. The Department of Justice filed formal federal charges, 4 counts including conspiracy, destruction of government equipment, false claims, and unlawful trespass on federally integrated systems. If convicted, Karen was facing up to 6 years in federal prison, not including restitution and the possibility of asset seizure to repay damages. Her lawyer asked for a plea deal. The U.S. Attorney's Office declined. For now, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. There was still trial ahead. But I will admit, I slept better that night. The day after the charges were unsealed, I found a letter on my gate. Handwritten. No glitter this time. Just black ink and shaky cursive. Michael, I didn't know. I really didn't. I thought you were just building some kind of private tech tower and hiding behind big words. I let people get worked up. I went too far. Karen. I folded the note and slid it into a drawer without comment. The new sign I'd ordered was delivered that same evening. I bolted it to the gate under the floodlight, just above the keypad entry. Private property of Federal System Integration Zone. Trespassers will be prosecuted under U.S. Code. No room for confusion. The courthouse in Yavapai County isn't particularly grand. Just 3 stories of beige brick and glass, flanked by thirsty palm trees, and a parking lot that smells like melted asphalt by noon. But when I walked through those doors for the pre-trial hearing, I may as well have been entering a missile silo. The energy in the building was electric. Reporters loitered outside the entrance. A few carried signs with vague slogans about overreach and HOA justice. I ignored them. I had bigger targets. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as Karen entered with her legal team. She looked smaller than I remembered, still in her white blazer like she was heading to a real estate brunch, but paler now. Her hair wasn't as perfect. She scanned the room but didn't meet my eyes. Her lawyer, a stiff-necked man named Colby Mears, opened by trying to delay the trial. My client, he said, was not made fully aware of the federal status of the equipment. She acted on a community safety concern. This was not malicious. It was misguided. Judge Holbrook, an older man with a desert-dry voice and a stare like sandpaper, replied, "She cut the lines." That's malice. I almost smiled. My attorney, Rothman, presented our evidence with surgical clarity. Photos of the destroyed dish, footage of the trespass, time-stamped emails, technical documents signed by NASA's operation chief, confirming federal jurisdiction. We submitted an affidavit from NASA's logistics manager detailing the telemetry blackout caused by the sabotage and its impact on orbital monitoring. And, of course, we handed over the letter Karen had left in my mailbox, her final warning, complete with underlining and red ink. It wasn't just enough to prove motive, it showed intent. On day 2, the prosecution brought in a satellite systems analyst from Goddard Space Flight Center. He explained the equipment, the data pipeline, the consequences of interruption. He even used a diagram to show how Karen's vandalism had cut a live stream used in real time for near-Earth object monitoring. She didn't just break a dish, he said. She broke a federal eye on the sky. Karen's lawyer tried to object, claiming the witness was inflaming the jury with apocalyptic hypotheticals. The judge overruled him. On day 3, the jury heard from Deputy Ramirez, then from the NASA liaison, then from Phil, the dog walker, who calmly testified that Karen had bragged about handling the satellite thing before the incident ever made the news. Apparently, she'd used the phrase, "I took action when no one else would." By that point, even the court sketch artist had stopped drawing her with any dignity. When Karen finally took the stand, the room held its breath. Her defense team had no choice. They had to let her speak, or risk the image of hiding guilt. Her voice was quiet, unsteady, but not remorseful. I wanted the neighborhood to look clean again. That thing was ugly. It looked like a weapon. No one told me it was NASA. He never put up a sign. Rothman stood. "Miss Mills, are you aware that your HOA has no jurisdiction over Mr. Brenner's property?" She blinked. I thought he was close enough. "Are you aware that you crossed a barbed wire fence?" Pause. "I didn't see it." "Are you aware you brought bolt cutters and removed federal equipment?" Silence. "Do you understand that regardless of your opinions about aesthetics, what you did is classified as federal property destruction?" Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The prosecution rested shortly after. The jury took less than 4 hours. Guilty. On all 4 counts. The judge was merciless. 6 years federal time, no parole for at least 4, restitution ordered to both NASA and myself, personal fine of $125,000, and Upon motion from Rothman, a ruling of civil liability for HOA Desert Pines for failing to stop or disavow her actions prior to the destruction, the courtroom was dead silent. Even Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the defense table. As she was led out by federal marshals, she didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. Her face was stone. But as she passed the gallery, someone from the back whispered, "She brought it on herself." And no one disagreed. That night, the HOA held an emergency vote. Karen was stripped of membership. Her access to HOA records was revoked. Her husband, red-faced and silent, moved out a week later. Phil sent me a text. "You just ended a decade of dictatorship. You have no idea how many people are cheering quietly." He was wrong. I had a pretty damn good idea. In the days following the verdict, something shifted, not just in Desert Pines, but in the entire surrounding community. It wasn't just the fall of Karen Mills. It was like the oxygen changed. The fear that had ruled that HOA like an invisible leash suddenly dissipated. People started acting like they could breathe again. At first, it was subtle. The handmade signs vanished from people's yards. No more HOA mandated fonts or approved plantings only plaques. A guy 2 streets over, who'd been fined for having solar lights that cast too cool a tone, installed an entire LED walkway overnight. A woman on the East End painted her front door turquoise. It was like watching people leave a cult. Meanwhile, HOA Desert Pines was in full-blown crisis mode. They'd been named as civilly liable in the judgment, and Rothman wasn't letting that go. We were pursuing damages not just for the destruction of property, but for negligent oversight, failure to prevent abuse of power, and institutional harassment. The HOA board scrambled to protect itself, claiming they hadn't known what Karen was planning, that she'd acted independently and without approval. But they weren't just running from the lawsuit, they were running from their own residence. An anonymous petition circulated, demanding the complete disbandment of the existing board and an independent auditor to review the HOA's finances, communications, and enforcement actions over the past 5 years. Turns out Karen hadn't just destroyed federal hardware, she'd also buried a long trail of overreach, illegal fines, selective enforcement, and one particularly disturbing letter warning an elderly couple not to park their RV in their own driveway. Unless they wanted a citation. The pressure was mounting. And then came the audit. At Rothman's request, and under pressure from NASA's legal team and a growing number of community members, a neutral auditor was assigned to the HOA's internal records. What they found turned the already smoking ruins into a crater. Karen had been using HOA funds, community fees, to finance private legal consultations. She'd sent payments to a private investigator to monitor non-compliant properties. She'd even attempted to hire a local contractor to build a signal-dampening enclosure around my property. There was a paper trail, emails, invoices, approval stamps under her name. The HOA board had known. At least 2 of them had signed off. It was now a full-blown scandal. The county attorney opened an investigation into HOA Desert Pines for misappropriation of funds and conspiracy to commit property interference. Residents demanded restitution for years of fines, many of which were discovered to have no legal basis. One man, Phil's neighbor, had paid over $2,000 in landscaping penalties, only to find that his violations had been made up on the spot by Karen and logged on a spreadsheet marked disruptors. In parallel, Rothman escalated our civil case to seek class action status representing not just me, but all affected homeowners. We were now talking 7 figures in damages. HOA Desert Pines had officially become a legal and financial sinkhole. They tried to settle. They offered a public apology, the full reimbursement of equipment costs, and a goodwill fund to NASA for the mission delay. They offered to pay me a private courtesy sum if I dropped further legal action. I said no. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure people like Karen and the bureaucratic parasites who protect them never pulled this kind of thing again. So Rothman kept pushing. In the meantime, I was rebuilding. NASA had fully replaced the array, this time with a next-gen high-gain antenna complete with hardened casing and motorized tilt correction. They installed an encrypted transmission relay box with tamper detection protocols and gave me a direct contact at Mission Operations. They even sent a representative to tour the property and conduct a security consultation. Now I had motion-detecting spotlights, underground fiber with backup redundancy, and perimeter alarms that could ping my phone, my laptop, and 3 backup devices. I wasn't just back online, I was fortress ready. And the cherry on top? The new installation came with a custom steel housing, laser cut with a NASA logo, and the following phrase in bold black lettering: Authorized Federal Instrument, Do Not Tamper, Protected under U.S. Code. I had it bolted directly into the base plate, just in case someone else got any bright ideas. That week, I threw a small barbecue. Phil came by. A few of the neighbors who'd quietly supported me over the months stopped in too. Someone brought beer. Someone else brought a cake shaped like a satellite dish. One of the engineers from the install crew even showed up. We didn't toast the verdict. We didn't talk about Karen. We just stood on my back deck, watched the sky slowly turn orange, and listened as the array clicked to life, scanning, turning, tracking. Somewhere up there, hundreds of miles above us, was a satellite bouncing telemetry off a new, clean link. And down here, I finally had peace again. It was exactly 6 months to the day since Karen Mills set foot on my property and cut the cables to a federally licensed satellite dish. 6 months since she declared war on something she didn't understand, using the petty authority of a suburban committee to justify a federal crime. And now, the last piece of the fallout was finally falling into place. The HOA Board of Desert Pines no longer existed. The county audit had triggered a complete structural collapse. 3 board members resigned, 1 was indicted for fraud, and the HOA's remaining assets were frozen pending court-ordered restitution. The state's attorney general had launched a civil enforcement action calling the HOA a textbook example of unchecked local power run amok. Residents voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. The bylaws were repealed, the enforcement structure disbanded, and the community opted for voluntary neighborhood association status with no legal authority over private landowners. Phil sent me a text that morning. "We're free." At this point, I'd stopped smiling when people sent me messages like that. Not because I didn't appreciate it, because I understood what it had cost to get there. The final civil trial concluded with a judgment in my favor, full reimbursement for the destroyed equipment, $275,000 in personal damages, and a separate $500,000 judgment against HOA Desert Pines as part of the class action. That figure included forced repayment to dozens of homeowners for years of unlawful fines, threats, and retaliatory behavior. The case was cited on national legal forums as a landmark decision against HOA overreach. Karen remained in federal custody. Her appeal was denied. She would serve her time in a medium security facility in New Mexico. 6 years. No early release. The restitution clock had already started. The court ordered the liquidation of several of her assets, a leased SUV, a small investment property in Tempe, and her home, which went up for auction in early spring. No one from Desert Pines placed a bid. I considered it for exactly 1 minute. Didn't need the baggage. Instead, I focused on the work. NASA contracted me for an extended term. What started as a part-time telemetry relay grew into a long-term partnership. I was now managing 3 satellite data streams, hosting backup uplink relays for a West Coast weather tracking initiative, and serving as an emergency receiver for low Earth object monitoring. I had security clearances now, real ones. Not the "please don't break this" tag a civilian gets, but the kind that come with encrypted login portals and mandatory background checks. Every time I walked past the new array, polished steel glinting in the sun, I felt 2 things: pride and a deep, permanent intolerance for anyone who thought their rules applied beyond their fences. I installed one more sign, this one mounted on a steel post sunk 4 feet deep into concrete. Federal Communications Facility trespassing is a felony under U.S. law. No HOA access, no exceptions. Then I added a smaller plaque beneath it, mostly for me. Karen's rock. May stupidity never rise again. Phil laughed so hard when he saw it, he nearly dropped his sandwich. I hope she sees that from space. I nodded. Let her wonder. The desert was quiet again. At night, when the stars came out and the wind settled into that dry, rustling hush, I sometimes sat on the back porch and watched the antenna rotate. It moved with such mechanical certainty. No ego, no noise, no nonsense. It did its job, clean and efficient, without asking permission. I liked that, because after everything, that's what I came here for in the first place. Silence. precision, freedom, and now, finally, I had all three.